It's a bit of a rainy day, and I hope the sound doesn't um, affect the videos so much. Today, I want to talk about the nature of the mind that hosts very microscopic, invisible connections. Um, how is everything connected? So we like to say that like there's coincidences and synchronicities, um, and yet how? So when people's bodies move in the inner dance, a lot of those connections are actually happening. I want to look at the nature of that, which is explored um, in the cognitive sciences as networks. You know, like within us, there's like a universe or an internet of data, and there could be three different types actually. You can have an awareness of your iconic network. And so this might be all the images you've ever seen. How are they stored inside your body? So let's say there's the image of a house, for example, that might be linked with certain things in the house. It could be something that looks like this. Um, Not just that, you also have other networks. Let me just share three of them today. Now, when you look at the semantic network, what you're really regarding would be the nature of meaning as it's normally encased in concepts or words. So instead of um, this, maybe what you would have is this, and that would interrelate with that, and then you would have that. And it could just keep going. This could be anything that you can think about. You could draw a picture of a baby, which would connect to mother, milk, diapers, like poop, innocence, purity, and so on and so forth. So, in a way, this is what our minds look like. I can't really draw this for you because it exists within sound. Echoic network organizes all the possible frequencies and vibrations you've ever heard within your body. This would look more like an orchestra or a symphony or a song um, that makes you audibly you. Holding this in place, we start to understand that the nature of the inner dance is, in fact, the mind's ability to move across um, this universe, you know? Maybe uh, you can dance through there, and somehow the sacred movement is able to create new bindings, new wirings, new connections that might not have been so prominent before. Um, so when you start to visit energy, this actually is happening like so deeply, and the more we look at it, the more possible understanding might come. For now, I want to bring up a very important concept that differentiates two different ways in which we can experience the network. Now, one word people in energy process tend to use a lot is activation, right? So, what does it really mean to activate? Um, there are two ways of doing that, really. The first being a direct priming experience, and within that model, um, a high latent inhibition is happening. Don't be scared of the term, we'll cover what it means. Um, so direct priming describes more linear way in which the mind explores connections. So let's say this is number one, this would be number two, makes choices. Oh, let's go here, number three, number four, number five, and so on and so forth. Um, this is not what's happening in the inner dance. In the inner dance, um, what is called a hyper priming is at work. Oh, sorry. Hard to concentrate when you're doing video and drawing at the same time. A hyperpriming could be modeled within an omnidirectional way in which um, information is so much more diversely spread out. So you can imagine the brain of a baby or even an animal. Um, they actually have so much more connections that we do, because the more you know, the less you do. The more you learn concepts, the more you learn images, the more you undergo certain patterns. You actually have to remove, like a lot of the connections. You prune um, synaptic connections. You prune neurological wirings, neuronal connections. So what you end up is this. Um, so let's say you have a chance to move from here back to here. What you would then experience is a low latent inhibition. And how this works in the inner dance process is um, about the rerouting of certain neurotransmitters that normally organize, like we talked about, motor functions and emotions, attentions, memory. That what we remember is what we know through Hebbian learning. When neurons fire together, then they wire together. So when we start to form certain habits, um, we basically prune away existing connections, so that we tend to limit our mental capacities when we come into culture, when we come into language, when we come into logic systems. Okay, so given this, I want to go into what is paradigmatic meaning. Because when you go into the process of um, going back to the origins of interconnectedness, going back to the mind of the baby, um, we tend to see a lot of things. We tend to experience and sense many connections that we didn't see before. So, for example, a house could lead to the image of a dragon, and then suddenly you see a rainbow. Things that don't seem to connect insanely creatively, like some inner artistry, start to interlink with each other. Like tree, and maybe that would be money and communism, and like uh, like an airplane, or the, it's like this weird, amazing craziness we find so present in the dream state. When an inner dance starts to happen, the very physical movement is in fact the allowance of hidden or inhibited connections to come alive, which is a spreading of activation that moves from here to here. So I want to bring up one example that I brought up in an audio that might be useful in allowing these to become practical to us. Let's hit two birds with one, not a stone. What can we hit a bird? Like sunflower seeds. Let's hit one bird with 1,000 flowers, sunflower seeds. They might like that. So we speak about transmission because it's often used just like the word activation. Um, uh, I want to look at this because every time you use a word, you create a cascade of um, other conceptual domains that um, hold that reality in place. Transmission, as it is normally used, um, regards the transportation of something. Usually, it's energy, it's electricity, the transmission of information, and we are shifting our understandings of what is being transmitted as we are innovating new forms of media, new forms of information. Um, Most likely, transmission follows through with um, communication as a conceptual domain. I think this is what's more important to look at. Like, what is the cascade within communication itself that um, creates a basis for which a lot of people use the word transmission. Um, so when you think of communication, normally you need to have a sender. This is maybe an older definition of communication, anyhow. You need to have someone to receive what is being transmitted. Paradigmatically, you also need like a message, and you also need some kind of medium, because messages aren't transmitted through a vacuum. So traditionally, this can be seen within the communications model. Let's look at the most common one that's been used in theory. Um, we can look at it from Jacobsonian modeling later on, but for now, let's maybe simplify things um, to just uh, look at things in general. So, for a communication or a transmission to happen, there has to be a clear sense of someone sending something out. There has to be a content, there has to be a channel that mediates the message, and there has to be someone receiving it. Now, when you look at these four elements, um, when you look at these four elements, you will notice that there are different possible interpretations of what might seem obvious, what might be simple, especially maybe when you look at um, which network are you dominantly using. What are you dependent on? A lot of people can be very visual in their spiritual experience or in their realities. Like a lot of people work more with images as opposed to certain people who work more with meanings, and some people experience sounds. Their sensitivities are heightened more with vibrations, much more than images. So you would notice sometimes in the work that we do, a lot of people actually have to close their eyes when they're listening to people in order to receive the meaning. Semantics, um, in many ways, defines words. Words hold semantics. Sorry, this is a little bit. Okay, let's reread that. A word in Sassurian linguistics is, in fact, the combination of the sound and the image. And when you go into energy process, sometimes Sound could be more prominent, sometimes image is more prominent, and very often it's actually a translation between both. Using music as a tool, people start to see images. And what we're doing is we're going into a deeper dimensionality that normally operates on semanticity or speech or linear language. So when you look at this and we try to understand the differentiations between, let's say, a time in our evolutions when we were more dependent on sound as opposed to the evolutions into modernity when we start to use images a lot more. Um, the communication model could look very, very different depending on when was the communication happening or what medium are we using to hold a transmission. Yeah. So in the age of oral traditions, when we were relying on the spoken word to send forth like what we wanted to convey, we were reliant more on the right brain, and communication systems were more. Let's look for the black. Were more two-way. So there was a less clear distinction between the energy of the sender and the energy of the receiver. So that a sender might send a message through a medium, a receiver would receive it, and then the receiver would then take his or her turn to become the sender. You know, they would retort, they would reply their own messages using the same medium usually to establish a feedback. So what took place was when we invented technologies that would allow us to move from sound to the image, um, we reinvented the brain. We moved from the right brain to the left brain for one, and we moved from subjectivity to objectivity. We were able to store information on mediums just like this one, you know, like I can store this in a way that sound cannot. As soon as I speak it, it's already gone. In tribal times, anyway, before we created recording companies and these amazing audio devices that can store our the soul of our sound. In the age of literacy, we were able to store what used to be so temporal, and what that did, especially in the age of the book, what that did was um, it it took this away momentarily. It took this away. Um, so yeah, let's destroy this. Um, when you write a book, the you can't speak when you write a book. Here's the message, and then here's the book on paper, and it's hard version. When a receiver reads the book, you can't really talk to the book. The book will talk to you, but you can't experience some kind of authorship. You can't establish some kind of authorship that is primarily given to the one who holds the pen, the one who holds the power to write the story down. And authorship, in many ways, holds a lot of power, a lot of authority. So, since we are so much coming from a highly Newtonian three dimensional paradigm, Even though we're learning all of these energy-based tools, Newtonian science, Newtonian reality is simply still based on three-dimensional thought. Um, and literacy had a huge hand in establishing power structures. It's ironic because it was in orality, it was in the age of orality when religious traditions were more dominant, so that through the mediation of the priest and the Bible, the one true sender um, originally was God. So there was always this clear awareness that those who receive that message aren't basically the source. And I think this is what our work in energy explorations is trying to heal. So eventually we discovered electricity and technological innovations that allowed us to move from book-based mediums to electronic mediums. So transmission at that point um, was interesting, borrowing a lot of the mechanisms that are involved in literacy, even as we're beginning to experience possible feedback loops that orality held, because television and radio were still mass media based. In the early usage of that, those who held the resources, held the information, still pretty much also held authorship. Um, and so it was really maybe only when we um, innovated the internet that we could bring this back. Um, Suddenly, um, there could once again be, through media and spiritual process, a bidirectionality, an omnidirectionality that allows receivers once again to become senders. Just like when you have these cell phones, the like of which I'm using now, I don't have to be Steven Spielberg to make a movie. All I need is to sit down with these materials that I have before me and upload these onto YouTube, and suddenly I can become like a filmmaker. Um, so this is important to understand because um, transmission has been moving away from a Newtonian model to maybe a more quantum cosmological model, um, which means that even these are becoming very, very unclear. In the past, when um, technologies were quite basic, especially still through here, um, senders were very singular, messages were simple, mediums were few, and receivers were very conventional. It is very easy to create um, common messages that would be received in great popularity. You could create revolutions, you could stagnate societies just by utilizing and sustaining messages and mediums that um, those who had this could rely on. Right now, through these, there is a polyvocality, meaning whenever something is sent out, the actual sender is the context the sender lives in. It's like the entire culture being channeled by the sender is now being sent out in polysemanticity, meaning each message now has so many meanings because the languages of the world, the cultures of the world are interlocking with each other. There's so many types of media as well taking place now holding all these messages, transmitting all these messages, and there's also polyreceptivity. Um, um, you know, audiences are changing their minds every day because they're so influenced by the polyvocalities of the multiple senders. When you open, let's say, social media accounts, there's this news feed where temporal messages are streaming through, being consumed by everyone in some kind of network of everything, everyone, every place, every time. So, what the internet has been doing, uh, it, it has been to bring us back to tribal minds, tribal experiences. We're reactivating the right brain that had become very recessive because of the dominance of the left brain. And to describe this event through the thoughts of Walter Ong, a student of Marshall McLuhan, who was the media theorist of the age, a secondary orality is happening. We're retaining a lot of the mechanisms that we have gained through literacy, which makes us intelligent as we kind of are now. But for some reason, we're having to go back to a tribal mind where feedback systems were a lot more circular and not so one way. So I feel maybe these are important for us to regard because the inner dance is creating a bridge between like two types of thinking, and very often the inner dance becomes a mere tool that exists very much still within a very very old paradigm. If the inner dance is to achieve a certain level of success, um, I think it cannot stay merely as a tool, but that this is the paradigm. So we're experiencing a new brain, a new mind, a new universe of information, and the more we understand what it is we are um, moving through, I think we can develop a lot more amazing possible explorations of this that experiences music, experiences the movement, experiences the like language in highly informed ways. Um, Receivers must receive power because we're healing that system that establishes that the sender is the one that holds it. So at this point, when you experience energy, it's not actually clear who is sending, because everything just becomes one. The universe is sending itself as a message, coursing through itself as a medium, so that the universe can receive itself as a conversation with the one. So I want to thank this, and I want to thank all the spiritual technologies is mirroring how we're beginning to understand who we truly are. So thank you for listening, and looking forward to the next video. Bye.